Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 3, Episode 5. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, Steve, it's great to be back on the mic. I was on a little bit of vacation time, so it's great to be back together. Now, we should say right off the top, we've been doing episodes every 2 weeks in the summer, but starting next week after Labor Day, we go back to once a week. Lots of guests, lots of content for the rest of the year. So I'm actually really excited about that. It's really great. Let's jump right in. Top of my mind is what is going on with Amazon. They're talking department store, or people familiar with Amazon are talking department store, which is,
a few things. First of all, Amazon, as I think everybody knows by now, just experiments with a lot of things. I also think they like to jerk the market around because every time there's a rumor of an acquisition or a new format, they opened this hair salon in London and I was, oh my God, they're going into the beauty business. So I think it's hard to extrapolate from any particular thing. I do think, in fact, I posted on Twitter earlier today an article I wrote for Forbes in 2018, and I talk about this in my book as well, that I do think the future of Amazon is much more physical. And there are many big categories, groceries been the one we've been talking about most recently, but apparel and accessories, particularly on the higher end, that they're underpenetrated in, even though they have a huge business. So the idea that they might do something that is department store-like, I think is inevitable. What that will look like, including, I think there's still the possibility they'll acquire somebody. The only other thing I would say about it is we're going to have to sit down and have like a naming convention, because what they're talking about doing is not a department store, I don't think. I don't want to be too much of a literalist about it, but I don't expect it to look very much like what we would conventionally think about anyway, a department store, i.e. having departments. So I think it's going to be an apparel, accessories, and kind of omni-service center. But we'll see.
Have you ever been to London, England?
I have, many times.
Have you been on the Tube, their subway? And the very famous, what do they say just about when you're in the Tube? Mind the gap. And so that's my segue into earnings. So the Gap just today, we're recording this on Friday, just released some earnings that were really good. And some other companies have released earnings. What's your observation about the current or the latest roster of earnings releases?
Well, as we've talked about multiple times, it's a little hard, I think, to make sense of a lot of these earnings because we've been in such unusual times and the comparisons are really easy for the apparel players anyway. So if we look at the Gap, anybody, Macy's, Kohl's, some of the others that are generally in the more casual part of apparel and accessories, they're comparing against really, really easy comparisons. So most of those numbers look really good. I'm not particularly surprised it's translating to the bottom line pretty well. I know a number of the analysts, and it's another thing we've talked about a bunch of times, how wrong analysts have been. They've been surprised by some of these earnings reports. But I think at the core of it is most of these retailers really locked down on expenses. They bought inventory pretty tightly. So we're not seeing nearly the kind of markdowns that we would typically see. So I think they're just getting a lot of operating leverage as the sales go up. So kind of as expected. Nordstrom was a bit of a disappointment, but then again, Nordstrom's more higher end apparel going out, more that kind of stuff. And with COVID, that's not back to the degrees.
And back to office, right? So you could see actually through the numbers, the back to school period kind of kicking in and going more normally.
Right.
But what is missing, it feels like, is that back to the office kind of back to, September. And that's going to hit Nordstrom and that category retailer, right?
Yeah, and I think as long as we've got, at least in the States and some other markets, we've still got this kind of COVID overhang where we're not beyond it the way I think many of us expected, and certainly probably all of us hoped. It's going to be tough, I think, for that to really get going. I think it more kind of creeps back as opposed to this big acceleration we've seen with more casual back to school kind of apparel.
Let's talk about Warby Parker. We've talked about them before. We were kind of rubbing our hands, kind of saying, hey, it looks like we're going to get our hands on some numbers.
Yeah, well, they've been rumored to be filing for going public. And sure enough, they filed in the S1 for those of us who like inside baseball. I don't know if enjoyed, is the right word, but I did dig into it, and there's a lot of interesting facts there. The one that I have to say, I got to call up a few people, because several people, sometimes when I've been critical of some of these digitally native vertical brands growing very, very quickly, but losing a ton of money, several people who I thought actually knew what they were talking about said, well, Warby Parker, they're the exception. They've been making money. Well, it turns out that's not true. They have lost money and continue to lose money. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not positioned for a successful future, because some of their underlying customer economics, retention, those sort of things that point to long-term customer lifetime value actually look pretty positive. So some encouraging signs there, great growth, a bit smaller business than I expected as well. So that's interesting. The most interesting thing perhaps is that their business is now about 50% brick and mortar and 50% online. A little bit of movement because of COVID, and it's a little bit hard to tell how that is going to look going forward. But they're already up to, I think, about 140 stores, planning to open a bunch more. So again, one of these brands that thought perhaps they could be a successful business online only, that is now making a big play in physical, and it looks like they're there's a little bit of issue of how they account for it, but it looks like their physical retail is actually quite profitable at the 4-wall level, which is encouraging for sure.
What do you think from a strategic perspective about the moat around Warby Parker? I wonder sometimes how big a moat they actually have, because there's, from Bailey Nelson, there's half a dozen eyeglass brands with pretty much the same model. And when I walk into the different, like type organizations, and I'm a Warby Parker customer,
I would frame the question a little bit different. I do think I'm pretty impressed with their moat, because I think they have not only executed really, really well, they've built a very strong brand. And ultimately, there's plenty of examples of products that are very, very similar, but it's the branding, it's the story that really allows them to charge those margins. So I would say I'm pretty positive towards Warby Parker's differentiation and ability to grow. My bigger question is really how high it is up. Like I said, the business is a little bit smaller than I thought it was, mainly because I thought the online business was bigger. I think we had pretty good information on what the physical volume could be like. They have a very particular model. They're at a certain price point. They're at a certain quality level. They have added opticians and so forth, but they're not competing in the same way, or as holistically, I guess you could say, as some of the traditional players. And there's lots and lots of competition, not only some of the brands you mentioned, but the Sam's Club, and so
sure.
How can this brand be 3 or 4 times as big without fundamentally changing the model that's gotten them there? That's more my question, not as much the branding and differentiation. I think they've done a really good job on that. And now I'm a customer, and I guess the other thing I'd say about the size of the business, which there is some indication in the S1 that this is working, is people are, because of the lower price point, because of a little bit more of a fashion orientation, people are buying more frequently than the traditional eyeglass purchase of, I buy a nice pair, and then unless my prescription changes or I break them or I lose them or something, maybe
right.
multiple years before I buy another pair, or maybe I have a cheap backup pair. So they seem to be changing the purchase frequency a bit. But again, how many people are going to buy into that model compared to the more traditional model? Well,
my bold prediction is the way they're going to grow is they're going to consolidate the market and start buying competitors.
Ooh.
So, there are many very similar models at the same price point. I think somebody's got to come in there and start consolidating that business sooner than later, and I think it could be them.
Well, now they're going to have that equity. Could be.
All right, well, let's move on to the toy category. Our very special guest today is Ben Kaufman from Camp. There's so much activity over the past couple of weeks in the toy sector. It's almost as if we planned it. We
use very powerful machine learning to determine our guests, and the algorithm predicted.
Real intelligent. What do we got? We got Toys R Us going into Macy's. We've got Disney opening up shop-in-shops, really, in Target. In Canada, here, Toys R Us got sold. So they moved from private equity into operating ownership, which is great to see. And the Toys R Us business, by the way, in Canada was a fantastic business. Yeah. They were shipping cash by the wheelbarrow to the U.S. business.
Yeah, it's a little bit of I guess a story we've seen played out in a lot of categories where you've got strong players like Toys R Us. We also had KB Toys here in the U.S., which were these mega brands, really. I mean, they had lots of stores. And then Walmart, Target, others made toys more of a loss leader, or at least a traffic driver. And so I think they started to steal share from some of the traditional players. But Toys R Us really did not evolve to modern retail. They tried to be a little bit of everything, nothing inspirational really about their merchandising. They were pretty slow really to do digital. Then they were leveraged buyouts. So a lot of things went wrong at Toys R Us. A lot of things went wrong at KB Toys. FAO Schwarz, much smaller player, but they got themselves in trouble. So I think this created this big opportunity, kind of a vacuum. So I think it's an attempt to bring perhaps a little bit more, certainly more distribution to put toys in a department store like Macy's. And then I think Target just continues to try to find those noteworthy brands where they can create more of a shop within a shop. Ultimately, I got quoted in a news story this week about whether I thought Macy's would, this would make a big dent. And my answer is no, I don't think it's going to make a big dent. It's 400 stores, which is not massive. It's a temporary offering. Macy's still, I think, has plenty of issues in terms of traffic. I don't know that toys are top of mind as for a Macy's shopper necessarily, but certainly just by virtue of their traffic, it being the holidays, they're going to do some business. But I doubt this.
They're going to do some business.
Yeah, I doubt. I think Disney and Target's way more interesting, and even though Camp, as we'll talk about, is way smaller, I think that's a much more remarkable story than putting some toys on the Macy's website and having a little offering for a couple months during the holidays.
Before we get to Ben Kaufman, just a reminder to the listeners of that we have a YouTube channel and our episodes are on our YouTube channel. The last episode, a little slow getting up. It should be up now as you're listening to this. And then this episode will be up in a day or two. And you get to see, we'll get to see the full on, the bonuses. We do edit some of the stuff for time that you and I talk about. So the full episode, you get a bit of bonus content, I guess you could say. Yeah. Plus you get to see your smiling face. So that's a big bonus in and of itself. There you go. All right. Without further ado, let's get to Ben. Ben, welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast. How are you doing?
I am remarkable.
We've heard.
Just like my co-host and his book, Steve Dennis. Steve, how are you?
Almost remarkable, just a notch below remarkable. But, I'm going to work up to remarkable by the end of the week.
Well, I tell you, we're working to remarkable today on the podcast. Ben, your brand and your story and your perspective on retail is truly remarkable. Steve and I put lists together of people we'd love to speak with, and you were at the top of that list in terms of this experiential retail and whatever you have going on, and Camp. So we're thrilled to have you on the mic. So why don't we start? We've kind of jumped in. Why don't we start at the beginning? Tell us a little bit about yourself, professional journey. You're quite an entrepreneur. You've got media. You've got all kind of mix of things, and then you've got Camp. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, started Camp about 3 years ago with my wife and a few others, and the basic idea for Camp was to do for families what Starbucks did for professionals, give them a place to hang out together outside of homework and school. And the journey to Camp was a windy one. We went at the point at which I started Camp, I was the CMO of BuzzFeed, really helping to turn them into more of a direct-to-consumer business and move them away from being 100% advertising-driven business, instead using the scale of the BuzzFeed audience to really develop products and experiences that allowed us to have a direct relationship with the consumer instead of just a direct relationship with an advertiser. Prior to that, I ran a company called Quirky, which is an invention platform where people submitted product ideas and we manufactured and sold the best ones into national retailers. And directly before that, I was founder of a company called Mophie, which is an Apple accessory company, most known for the Mophie Juice Pack, which is the Apple battery case for iPhones. But that's what the world knows it as. I know it as the company named after my two golden retrievers, Molly and Sophie.
You know what's interesting about, and you and I have had the opportunity to speak recently on my Conversations Commerce Next podcast, more about your career and different elements. But we also spoke about, what you learned in your past entrepreneur pursuits that actually has continued to fuel your future pursuits, right? I mean, that seems to be a kind of consistent thread of stitching these things together. And one of the things that jumps out at me is the ability to create ideas, but you got to still get them to market. And that's where it seems like camp has come together for you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like every experience has built another kind of part of our arsenal of things we know how to do. At Mofi, we learned how to make products. At Quirky, we learned how to make products for other people and manage large online communities of loyal customers. At BuzzFeed, it was how do we take that audience and actually turn them into transacting customers and explore new business models. And really, what we do at Camp is bring all that together into an ephemeral retail concept that's anchored in fun and creativity.
In that regard, Ben, could you? I'm sure we've got some listeners that have been to a camp location. I've been several times. In fact, I'm in Dallas. I went over to the camp store just yesterday to kind of refresh my memory and see what was new and next. But can you just help paint a picture for folks that haven't been to camp? What's it about? What was the inspiration? What might they expect if they were to go check out one of your locations?
Sure. So the core camp concept is anchored around something we call the magic door. And so the story of camp is that you walk in and when you first walk into the store, it feels like a cozy 2,000 square foot old school general store, like it's been there for 100 years. And in that front of the store, you'll find toys, you'll find gifts, you'll find apparel, you'll find candy. It's kind of like, again, entering a general store in a podunk town. But the secret to camp is that there's a magic door, and families find the magic door and they push it open. And behind the magic door is an 8,000 square foot kind of black box theater where the entire theming and merchandising and experience in that space behind the magic door changes, usually on a quarterly basis, to seamlessly integrate what we call play, product, and programming. So play, it's an indoor space. It's kind of, think about it like a bougie playground. It's a playground that's always open, regardless of what the weather is outside. It's a nice place to be. Product, we merchandise and curate the store with about 70 to 80% wholesale items from great vendors around the world, and then we have a growing business of our own products, which are stocked in our stores as well. And then lastly, programming, and the programming has a couple of dimensions to it. Obviously, the themes changing and moving from store to store, and the experience completely changing every quarter is in essence programming. But we also have a space in the very back of camp, which we call our Campy Theater, and this is where we'll do things like family yoga in the morning, date night drop off, where you drop your kid off at 6 and pick them up at 9, so you can go out and have a date night. We'll do celebrity book readings, etc. So that's really a place where we can fill the calendar with amazing, repeatable things for families to do over the course of the days and weeks to fill our year.
And you actually sell tickets to things. That's right, huh?
We do in the very back, like things like the yoga and things like the date night drop off. Those are ticketed experiences.
One of the favorite stores that I've discovered over the years. It's in fact, I talk briefly about camp in my book, so I'm a big fan. One of the things I haven't been such a fan of, though, is the term experiential retail, because I'm not sure that there's a standard definition or a working definition of what that means. And of course, people said, well, the future of retail is going to be about experiences. And then COVID hit. And then it was like, well, no, experiential retail is dead. I guess I've got a couple of questions. One is, what's your definition of experiential retail broadly? But in particular, how do you bring this all together in a physical space complemented by digital?
Experiential retail is definitely an overused term. Like I've heard retailers, mass market drug chains talk about experiential retailing being like signage or a place in the store where you can take a picture of yourself. And that's not an experience. So to me, I think about, forgetting the verbiage attached to any of this stuff. I think about this stuff very simply. Is there a reason to leave your house? If the store doesn't provide a reason to leave the house other than the procurement of a thing, then that could be done somewhere else. That could be done online. That could be done through a courier. It could be done somewhere else. The store has to be the reason to leave the house. And that to me is why we do what we do. If you know you want a Hot Wheels, whatever set, you're going to buy that on Amazon. I'm not even going to try and compete for that transaction. Not a thing for me. Not at all. Instead, I want to get you out of the house. I want you playing with your kid. I want you smiling and having fun. And listen, if the Hot Wheels happens to be there, chances are you'll buy it.
So, Ben, you're in a category that's, to say the least, dynamic. I mean, this week alone, we've seen a lot of news in the category. We've got some great product launches in Canada here where I am. Toys R Us Canada has just been sold by private equity, and it's actually a going concern. And you've got Disney stores going into whatever is Toys R Us is going into Macy's is going all these different things. You didn't choose. I mean, you didn't choose a boring category. Let me put it that way. What drew you to the toy category? Was it the opportunity to provide that experience for kids and their parents, and just naturally became toys? Like, which came first in that cart and the horse? Really, when you started thinking about your next venture. I mean, for me, toys is particularly when you started, it was, struggling a bit, right?
It wasn't a product-based decision. It was an experience-based decision. So we wanted to create a place for families because we felt like there was no national destination for families to spend time together outside of the home anymore. So once you do that and you realize, oh, wow, I have a lot of families coming on a repeated basis. What do you sell them? What do you put in the store? Yes, toys are part of the picture. Yes, apparel is part of the picture. Yes, food and beverage is part of the picture. Giftables is part of the picture. So the store is very much like a general merchandise retailer, not necessarily a toy store. We consider ourselves able to sell anything, and we really think that we're trading on time instead of transactions, if that makes sense. So when we think about what we do, we want to have a good enough experience that you want to spend time with us. And if you spend time with us, chances are you will transact with us. But to us, the equation is very much focused on how do we win families' time, not necessarily how we win families' money. We focus on the experience, and then the money will come.
And is that what brought you to do things like the partnership you've got going on with Paw Patrol, Spin Master, a great Canadian company? Was that always part of your vision? That kind of taking both the media side and the experience side, and as you say, the merging that together, the fun part, maybe some merch as well. Was that always part of it, or is this evolving?
Yeah, it was from the start. Like one of the observations I had at BuzzFeed as a CMO talking to other marketers was just how much money people spend on experiential marketing, which is incredibly inefficient, right? You come up with a pop-up idea, you find space, you have to hire a staffing agency, you have to train that staffing agency, you have to build a set, you run that thing for either some pop-ups run for a weekend, some pop-ups run for a month or two, and then it all goes in the trash. And one of the early inspirations for camp was if we build this black box theater with the proper infrastructure and a full-time team that's highly trained and warehouse, and stockroom systems, all sorts of things, experiential marketing could be a lot more efficient for people like the Spin Masters and people like the studios and even non-endemic sponsors like Ally Bank. That whole sponsorship angle and the rotational nature of our stores was baked into the business from the start.
I've got 15 different questions. I'll try to boil it down, but there's been a lot of discussion about, and one of my least favorite words, phygital, but the blending of physical and digital, and how to think more broadly about brand performance with stores driving online and vice versa. Doug Stevens talks about stores as media, and it seems like you guys, sort of lean into that. But, so many retailers seem to have a hard idea or a hard time getting their hands around this kind of total brand experience and this idea of capturing the customer's time rather than just sales per square foot or, something that's a very traditional metric. So how does your approach to camp inform the way you go about merchandising and marketing strategy? And ultimately, how do you measure success? Because clearly it can't just be about how many books or toys you sell on a given weekend and just in that particular location.
Yeah, I have one single metric that I obsess over, which is the stickiness of what we do, and we look at that on an omni basis. So it's just interactions with the family. We track customers. We'd like to know, are they on our website finding crafts to do with each other? Are they coming to our store? Are they buying things? All of those things are important to me. I want families to touch camp every week. That's the goal. Camp should be your answer to what should we do today as a family. And everything we do is just judged on how successful we are in being the frontline answer to that question. And so it isn't just like a revenue per square foot situation. It isn't repeat store traffic. Instead, it's repeat interactions with families and making sure we're delivering on the promise of helping them answer the what to do question.
And what would be your advice to, I mean, I think it's incredibly interesting. I guess what would be your advice to retailers that might be listening to this in terms of how they might think differently about their business? Because one of the things, just the initial observation I had when I was in the camp store was, there wasn't the kind, not anything close to the kind of product density you would see at a Toys R Us or any other traditional toy retailer. And you've got this space devoted to theater, basically, or experiences. And that just kind of fights, I think, with the traditional way that retailers think about it. But obviously, a lot of retailers are struggling to be successful. So if you're talking about somebody maybe in a different category or serving really different kind of customer, what advice would you give them about how they can reimagine their brand experience?
Yeah. So first I would just challenge the density assumption. I mean, I think we're doing our job by making you feel like we're not as dense as other stores, but we're a 10,000 square foot space with, over 5,000 SKUs at some points during our year. So we have a pretty good density of product. We just believe that you don't have to choose either or, product versus experience. Instead, it's our job to be creative around the use of space. So, for example, our Hudson Yards store, the entire eye level and below experience is devoted to merchandise, but we just put the kids up high. So we put the kids on top of the fixtures and let them climb up and discover a whole kind of indoor playground that sits on top of all of the usable merchandising space. You're not going to stock product at 8 feet and above. So instead, we put the kids up there, and that's the experiential moment. Right. So, my advice is don't make it a choice. Find a way to do both, because with enough creative people in the room, I do believe there's a way. And the reason other retailers haven't done it is just because it's a little harder, but it's not impossible.
Ben, tell me a little bit about, we haven't talked about digital. And I know initially I'm aware initially in the camp idea, digital didn't have a strong, certainly from a product sales perspective, didn't have a strong foot forward. But it, thanks to COVID, I'm sure you had to reassess that. And what are your thoughts on that integration, as Steve likes to call it, about hybrid retail? Obviously, you mentioned about, making sure that there's activities, so to speak, virtually. But talk a little bit about your thoughts around this integration of what you plan to do online. So important in some ways, but how important is it to your concept, and how do you think about it?
Yes, as you said, it became important over the course of 2020 when our stores were closed. But it is going to continue to be a huge anchor in our work, in the sense of being that answer to what to do today. Our site isn't just a site that tries to sell you the latest toy or the latest gadget. Instead, our site is meant to help your family figure out how to have fun together. Through editorial content, through mini games, through all sorts of interactive features. One of the things we grappled with as a company in relation to e-commerce is that, again, because we're not a transactional brand, because we're not 20% off toys today, or this is the new hit toy, we didn't want to be a traditional e-commerce site. So we've worked really hard to kind of pioneer what it would be like to be an experiential e-commerce company. And we built things like Camp White Elephant, which was basically an online game version of a Secret Santa White Elephant party, where families jumped online and were able to buy gifts from each other. Buy gifts from us, and then they would wind up in a virtual game room where they could unwrap each other's gifts, steal gifts from one another, and then when the game was over, we shipped the right gift to the right person. So again, experience plus commerce. We want you to remember the experience you had getting something, not just the thing you got. And then our latest version of this is something called the Camp Present Shop, which is the first place kids can shop online. So parents set a budget, and then kids can drag and drop products into their card, design a custom card, and everything that shows up to the home kind of wrapped as a beautiful gift.
What's next? I mean, expansion of physical locations. What's on your list of where you want this brand to be in pick a number, 5 years? But how do you think about what comes next? Is it growth exponentially, both vertically and horizontally? Talk about that a bit.
I mean, we'll open 3 more locations by the end of the year, which will get us close to 10 operating stores. And more stores is definitely part of the vision. But again, we don't think in those terms necessarily at Camp. Instead, we think, how do we become the brand that families grow up with? And that drives the strategy, that drives the location growth plan, drives the digital strategy. We really think of what we're doing is not building a retailer, but instead building a brand that is helpful to you and your family and inspires you and your family to smile and have fun and spend time together.
And you've done partnerships with other retailers. Do you see that as a big part of your universe moving forward? Would you describe that as ancillary or pivotal to your growth and success?
We've been really lucky with our partnerships, whether it be with the Walmarts and Krogers and Ally Banks of the world, or with studios like Spin Master and Paramount. And we are firm believers in retail media, and those sponsorships and partnerships really allow us to grow at a rate that we wouldn't be able to grow if we were just relying on our 4-wall revenues. So we're excited to keep pushing down that track.
One of the things in hearing you and you talk, Ben, is that I find kind of ironic is when I was early in my career a million years ago, one of the brands that was talked about, particularly from kind of a vision and strategy standpoint, was Disney, as the happiest place on earth. And I forget their exact mission statement, but, it was like to provide fun or joy or happiness or something like that. It was this really big idea. And then, also Toys R Us just kind of had this magic to me as a kid of, you want to go to Toys R Us. And here we are with Disney, having gotten out of the experience business basically and just doing a shop within a shop at Target, and Toys R Us, who knows what's going to happen with Toys R Us, but obviously they pretty much went out of business. And, here you are recreating, kind of this same idea about being the place that families want to go and thinking about kind of a higher level outcome, as opposed to we're just going to, like you said, we're just not about selling you the toy of the moment at 20% off. So it's just, there's something, I don't know, sort of poetic about an upstart being able to kind of recreate this when Disney has, lost their way, I would say, in a lot of respects, at least, in this outside of the theme parks.
We're definitely not the first people to play in this space. We wouldn't be able to do half the stuff we're doing if all the companies you just mentioned hadn't paved the way. I think that the big difference between, what we're doing and what other people have tried in the past is, we don't think of ourselves as a retailer.
Right.
Even the Disney example, like Disney retail was thought of as a retailer. It was kept very, very separately from the parks.
Yep.
And so, because we think of ourselves as a brand, and as a kind of pseudo media business, I feel like we'll make decisions that will allow us to think more comprehensively about, what a location based family experience looks like at scale.
As I said, it's a remarkable story. I hope people, if they have a Camp store in their area or are getting one soon, will go check it out. It's really quite extraordinary. And obviously you can go to camp.com also to see what the digital experience looks like. Ben, thanks so much for coming on and giving us a little taste of what Camp is about. And where are those, just quickly, where are the 3 stores that you're opening going to be, just so people can look out for those?
I think the only one we've announced so far that will be opening this year that I can talk about is in LA. So we'll be opening in Century City at the Westfield experience there. And the other 2 are on the East Coast. One in the one in the Boston area and one in the Metro New York area.
All right. Well, Ben, thanks again for coming on the podcast, and best of luck with the expansion and as you go forward.
Okay. Thank you so much.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast platforms, so you can catch up with all our great interviews. Subscribe so that just automatically shows up. Tell your friends, and also in new insights and new episodes will show up every week. So tell your friends, because that will help us share the word, the good wisdom. Now, be sure and check out, and be sure and check us out on our new YouTube channel. Not so new anymore. We got a couple episodes up there, and just look for Remarkable Retail.
And I'm Steve Dennis. You can check out more of my work at my website, stephenpdennis.com, or on Forbes, or on Twitter. And please check out my second edition of my book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, available just about everywhere books are sold.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast and a bunch of other stuff. You can find me on LinkedIn, learn about me on meleblanc.co. All right, Steve, great episode. Look forward to chatting again next week. Be safe and have a great rest of your day.
Same to you.